Hello and welcome back to the Magazine Monologues. This is episode 12. First, I'd like to acknowledge and apologize for the long delay between the videos. On May 17th, I started my summer internship, and so between figuring out that schedule, using this table as a home office, which means that generally there's significantly more like laptops and paperwork and etc. things on here. Between those, I was trying to figure out the best way to move forward with this project, and it looks like I have, well, not looks like, I have landed on the idea of recording in batches because YouTube lets you delay publications once you upload them. And so I'm going to probably record twice a week. I'm thinking roughly something like 3 on Sunday, probably 2 on Tuesdays, generally speaking. I mean, those dates are flexible. It hopefully won't affect anything on your guys' end because doing 3 on Sunday means that like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday videos are up, and then I have flexibility in figuring out, and I might do all 5 on Sundays moving forward, but all that to say is you will most likely see me in the same shirt in multiple videos in a row while I talk about different articles. So, if I remember correctly from the end of episode 11, I promised to do an article from Time Magazine, and so that's what I'm doing. If I said a different magazine at the end of episode 11, I apologize. But episode 12, it is coming from the May 24th, May 31st, 2021 double issue of Time Magazine, headlined Visions of Equity. The title of the article is A Catastrophe Waiting to Happen, and it is written by Joseph Hincks. Is that correct? It is. Joseph Hincks is a Middle East correspondent for Time Magazine. The article talks about a floating oil storage vessel named Safer that was installed in 1988 off of the coast of Yemen. It is actually connected to mainland Yemen via a 4.8 mile pipeline, undersea pipeline, to pump oil from mainland Yemen into this storage facility. One thing that is unclear to me from the article is whether or not that pipeline is active, or if the oil that is within the tanker has just been there for a while, or if it gets more new oil and then it's offloaded, which you will understand why that might be a problem soon. So the tanker, like I said, was installed in 1988. In 2014, basically since 2014, it has received virtually no maintenance. And sometime around 2014, they didn't actually specify a year in here that I recall or remember seeing when I went back through it. Sometime around 2014, the Houthi took it over. If you're unfamiliar with the conflict in Yemen, there's been a civil war raging for 7 years now. This is taped in 2021. I believe it was 2014 was the first year of the civil war. And the Houthi is one faction. You might see them referred to as like anti-government forces, but Houthi is the more traditional name. So the Houthi rebels, again, there's a lot of takes on the civil war, but traditionally they are referred to as Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebels have maintained and possessed this ship since roughly 2014. Could be 15, could be 16, a little unclear. And like I said, received basically zero maintenance. And there have been issues with getting maintenance and inspections on the ship. The UN, at least twice, mentioned in the article, I wouldn't be surprised if it was more, but at least twice, the UN has attempted to inspect and perform minor maintenance on this, and it's called the Safer, of all things, on the Safer. But the Houthi leadership, which, again, possesses the vessel, is like reversed or denied inspection more than once. Like the most recent one that they mentioned in here was the UN had an agreement with the Houthi leadership to come in and inspect the vessel and perform minor maintenance, and then the Houthi leadership rescinded that agreement and said they were bringing it under review. By the time that they ever got back to the UN timeline had passed for them to be able to rent a ship to get out there. And there's a lot of issues surrounding the ship, specifically on the inspection front. The Houthi leadership is, it's always weird to say like blame when it comes to things like this, but the Houthi leadership is kind of being blamed for using the floating oil tanker, or it's not a tanker, it's a floating oil storage vessel, as a like bargaining chip politically with the UN, with Saudi Arabia, with other interested parties, which isn't great, but at the same time is totally understandable. The US, China, Russia, Germany, Senegal, literally every country ever in the history of the world does things like this. You might disagree with it, you might agree with it, you might think it's terrible, you might think it's fine. It happens, that's all I'm getting at. But the main purpose of the article actually is to talk about the environmental disaster that is kind of waiting to happen. At one point, there's a picture in here that shows you the oil is separated. I mean, it's probably not this large, right? It's in a picture, so it could be like this much, it could be this much, but it's just a single sheet of steel separates the oil from the ocean. The oil vessel is estimated to hold 1.14 million barrels, which is 4 times more than the amount of oil that was spilled in the Exxon Valdez. There are 2 major environmental / ecological / humanitarian disasters that could happen from this. One they covered very briefly. If there's a fire on the ship, just the toxic fumes would heavily pollute the air for, I believe it was 4.8 million, or maybe it was 4.9 million people in Yemen and like another million in Saudi Arabia. And that was really all they said about it, is like the air pollution from an onboard fire would just be really, really terrible. It's crude oil, toxic. I mean, like, no surprise, right? It is quite close to shore. The other one that they spend the majority of their time on is if there's a leakage. So the single sheet of steel at this point that's separating the oil from the ocean, what if it rusts entirely away? What if in the process of normal ship operation procedures, they, I don't know, bump against something and puncture the hull? Like, all of these just terrible things. What if this 4.8 mile pipeline separates, you know? And that's bringing it back to the intro here. It's not clear if the pipeline is active, so if the pipeline just gets cut in the middle, I don't know if that's a huge deal. I mean, it's not good, but like, is it really bad? Is it getting oil from the land and from the boat going out of the ocean, or is it just going to be the boat? Which I say just, right? But like, one is worse than the other. All that to say is the over 1 million plus barrels of oil that could be basically just emptied has 4 major possible large effects. First one is, I'm going to say economic, but also humanitarian, where you're going to have like hundreds of thousands of people's jobs, fishermen, fishing-related jobs, things like that, are going to be impacted. That's admittedly not the largest effect. It sounds bad to have, 250,000, which that's the number, 250,000 estimated jobs be impacted. Sounds not good, especially in like an economically depressed and like destitute country that's been in a civil war for 7 years. The worst part is, so the port of, and I'm not entirely certain on the pronunciation here, but the port of Hodeidah is the largest port in Yemen, and the port of Hodeidah is estimated to account for 67%, roughly 2/3. It was roughly 67%, roughly 2/3 of the food supply for Yemen. Yemen currently imports about 90% of its solid food supply, or I can't remember actually know if it was solid or bulk food, but I believe it was solid food supply. It's roughly 9% imported. 3/4 of that comes through the port of Hodeidah. It is the most important port. And then, they have some other minor ports as well, right? But the oil spill would, almost no matter what happens, clog up the port of Hodeidah for an estimated 3 months, which you have a country that's been on the brink of famine, although based on the stats in the article, it's unclear if they have entered into famine territory. They say brink of famine, but 400,000 children are estimated to die this year in Yemen from hunger. You have another 4.9 million or something like that individuals that are, what they say, are on the verge of famine or on the brink of famine. Those sound like famine numbers to me. All that to say is, if the port gets blocked, that's terrible. Yeah, you'd think, oh, you can use other ports. In the United States, if the port of LA gets blocked, you could probably figure out a way to use Port of Seattle, Port of San Francisco, Port of Portland, etc. And like, it'd be an okay workaround. A country like Yemen probably only has one major port. It might have 2, but even if it has 2, it's lost 50% of its port capacity. That's just really bad. And so with the 67% of food, yeah, you could fly some of it in. It would be difficult to drive it across the Saudi border only because Saudi Arabia is pretty heavily involved in the Yemeni conflict. It's like unclear if they would allow the food to cross. But let's say you can fly it in. You can't fly in nearly enough. You would still have a massive, massive food shortage. And if 400,000 kids are going to die this year, like there's no oil spill. If they're going to die this year, you'd be looking at millions of deaths at that point. It would be very problematic. Issue number 3 is ecological. There's the coral reefs in that Gulf, which I believe actually it has 2 names: Persian Gulf / Arabian Gulf. I want to say, so like Myanmar and Burma, some people call them different things. I believe Persian Gulf and Arabian Gulf are geographically the same place. I do apologize if I'm wrong on that. But there are corals within that region which have a higher tolerance for rising sea level changes. Why is that important? A lot of coral reefs are bleaching, basically just dying. If you ever see a coral reef it's like, oh, it got bleached, think dying. When the temperature rises by 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit, is like roughly 2 and 4 degrees-ish, rounding a little bit there. Yeah, so, but the coral here can withstand up to 7 degrees Celsius rising changes. So there's a lot of research at the moment going on to using these corals to revitalize bleached corals in like Australia, California, wherever corals are bleaching. And so that would be a problem. The oil would probably kill a lot of those. And then the 4th is Saudi Arabia and Israel rely on desalination for a lot of their water supply. I mean, they're in deserts. The stat that they said in here was, I believe Saudi Arabia relies on desalination for 50% of its water supply, and I think Israel is 75% of its water supply. Israel might actually be a little bit more because the Saudi Arabian stat was framed as 50% of the water supply. The Israeli stat was framed a little bit differently. I think it's probably closer to 85% based on the way they framed it, but the number they gave is 75%. And like, that's a problem. People starving to death in Yemen, not good. People, thirsting to death, also not good. Yes, I mean, Saudi Arabia and Israel could probably import a lot of water, but it would become more expensive, and it's likely that the poorer individuals would not be able to afford as much. Like, it won't be as bad as the food crisis would be in Yemen, but like there still would be people that died of thirst. All that to say is basically everybody in the region, probably globally, should be very invested in figuring out this ship situation. It's not exactly helped by having the Houthi leadership plant armed guards on the ship to like make sure that the staff do what they're supposed to do, or to keep UN inspectors out, that kind of thing. Yeah, it is. I mean, the article was only, 4 or 5, maybe 6 pages long, but it is a very complex issue, and they definitely get that across in the article, but it is also a very important issue. Again, 4 times the size of Exxon Valdez, which A, was in the article, but B, I also think is going to be relatable, given that 5 out of 5 of my viewers, I believe, are Alaskan family members. So, but yeah, so that was episode 12, and episode 13 is also going to be coming from Time Magazine. Thank you.